So here's everything you're going to need for this DIY. There's not a lot of stuff. You've literally got your fabric, which you're going to be making the main section to the bunting out of. We've got a matching ribbon here, which obviously strings the bunting together, and mine's about 5 meters long, but it can be any length of your choice. We've got a piece of paper we're going to be making the template out of for each piece of the bunting, so it's all equal. A pen to help you draw that out, and some fabric scissors to cut everything out. Fabric scissors are better because they're just a lot sharper. So you can do your bunting with any shaped like pieces that you want, but obviously the traditional sort of bunting is triangles. So I've folded this piece of paper in half, and with a pen I'm just going to quickly draw out half a triangle along the fold, and that can be any size that you want, but obviously this is the size I've just drawn out. And then with these scissors just cut this out, and then you're left with a piece for your template. And obviously if the top looks like this, because obviously I drew it out slightly odd, then just neaten that off. Just so when you cut your pieces out and then match them up to the ribbon, it just sits a lot nicer. So now we have to lay out our fabric and use our template to cut all of the pieces out. Depending on the type of fabric you've got and whether it's got like a coloured front and a plain back, depends on how you lay your pieces out, because obviously you need them both to fit together, like right sides together when you sew them together. But obviously this is a double-sided fabric, so it doesn't really matter for mine, but preferably iron out your fabric before you cut the pieces out. I haven't had time to do that, so I'm just going to go ahead and cut them. And you might realise that this piece looks a bit bigger than the one that I just cut out, because I'd already pre-cut this and pre-cut some pieces of fabric out to just make this tutorial a bit quicker. So I'm just going to show you, you can pin this down onto the fabric when you're cutting it, but I just place it on and cut it roughly around it. So this piece wasn't cut too perfect as I was filming at an odd angle. That's basically what you need to do, just cut out loads of pieces of fabric to this exact template, which I'm going to do now, and just show you a few pieces that I've just cut already. So I've just quickly cut out a few more pieces to show you how they fit together, and I'm going to sew those on the sewing machine. You can do them by hand, but it's going to take a hell of a lot longer to do it that way, obviously, because sewing by hand is very slow. But we're just going to take two pieces of our template first of all, and like I said before, if you've got a fabric that's coloured on one side and like plain on the other, you want to put them two right sides together, but obviously I can't show you because mine's double-sided. But just fit them together as best you can. They don't have to be perfect because we're going to be sewing these with about 1/2 centimetre seam allowance, or maybe 1 centimetre seam allowance. So fit them together. You can pin them if you want, but I don't, because obviously it doesn't need to be perfect and it just takes twice as long pinning it. But I'll just go to the sewing machine now and show you how I will sew these together. So I'm going to sew these with a straight stitch, a very small straight stitch. If you've got the option on your sewing machine, you could do a 2.5 stitch, which is fairly small. And I'm just gonna, I think I'm going to do around a 1 centimetre seam allowance. I actually line it up with the side of this foot, just so I know that I've sewn them all the exact same size basically. Going to put the foot down and sew around the bottom two edges, not the top, we're leaving that to turn it inside out, but just sew these two edges in one continuous line. And remember to backstitch on the two ends. So we'll just take that out and I'll show you what it looks like. So here we have the piece I've just sewn, and as I said, we just stitched along the two bottom edges, and then we need to trim this down to about 1/2 centimetre. Just so it makes it a bit neater when we're turning it inside out. So there we go, that's the piece finished inside out. I've also got a few more that I finished earlier over here, which I need to now turn inside out and finish off. So all we're going to do is turn this piece inside out, push it out as much as you can with your fingers, and then to push this point out, just use the end of your scissors, trying not to obviously poke a hole through if your scissors are sharp. And when you've pushed it out as much as you can, try and flatten the sides out just by kind of wriggling it in between your fingers. It's hard to explain, but you get it when you actually try it. Just wiggling it pushes it out to its proper shape, like that. And now we need to top stitch the edges of these so it stays to a nice shape, like this one that I finished earlier. So I'm back to the sewing machine, and I actually want to top stitch this to about 1/2 centimetre this time. So I'm going to use this little line on my foot. You can't really see it, but you'll find a guide on your foot, whichever one you're using, to kind of match up all of the pieces when you're sewing them, so it just leaves a even gap on all your pieces. So I'm just going to put my foot down, like I said, lining it up with this line on the foot this time, so it's about 1/2 centimetre seam allowance, and then I'm just going to sew all the way around just these bottom two edges. So here we are, just top stitched it. I'm just going to trim these pieces at the top that are a bit uneven, just so when we attach it to the ribbon it fits in nicely. So because I used that piece of the foot, there was a little notch on it, I used that as a guide to sew my top stitch. All of the pieces that I've ended up doing have the exact same top stitching difference, if you get what I mean. They all look the same basically, and that's what you want. And I've actually done quite a lot of these already, which will be ready to sew onto my ribbon. So that's what I'm going to show you now. So the ribbon that you have will actually be folded in half, sandwiching each piece in between it. So your ribbon has to be, you know, obviously thick enough for it to be folded in half and still be a substantial kind of height to hold these. And obviously, depending on the length of your ribbon, depends on how many of these pieces you'll need. But I've worked out, by making a few of these already, I've worked out I need about 9 of these per metre. So times that by 5, and then you've got the amount of these that obviously you need to cut out. So obviously, because this is going to be hung up, we need to make a little loop on each end. But as I said, because it's going to be folded in half, I'm actually going to be sewing one of these pieces onto the ribbon and then carrying on the stitch up to the end and then folding it in half. You'll see when I obviously sew it up, you'll see what I mean. So like I said, you can pin this, or you can just do it by holding it in place. So we're going to sandwich the first piece a few inches away from the very end. Sandwich this in between the ribbon, and then you might want to pin it across here. And then on the sewing machine, I'm going to start at this end, sew all the way down the ribbon. When it gets to here, sandwich this in between it, and then finish the stitch, just so we've got the first piece sewn in. So I folded my piece of ribbon in half, obviously the right way with the shiny side up, and I've just put it in my foot, and I'm going to sew a couple of millimetres away from this bottom edge. I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to sew a couple of inches first before I sandwich this first piece in between it. And make sure to back stitch as well. So I've sewn a couple of inches back here, as you can see. Now I'm just going to really carefully place my first piece of bunting in between the ribbon, fold the ribbon over equally, match it up back at the end, and just sew over this here, making sure this piece is pushed right to the back of the ribbon. So now we've sewn over that, which is back here, you can put another piece in there, or you can finish this stitch off just so you can equally work out the distance between each piece that's going to be there, and basically do each piece one by one. But I am going to try and put another piece in now and kind of sew it in one length. So I want each of my pieces to be about 1 centimetre apart. So I'm going to put it in now, fold the ribbon back over and sew it again. Like so. Now I'm going to put the next one in. Just do one more and then I'll take it out and show you. So now I'm going to take that out, just show you what it looks like. So here are the first couple of pieces attached. I think it looks really cute. This ribbon, obviously, because it was a sheer, like it had a sheer finish to it, it has kind of bubbled slightly when I've sewn it, but that's just because of the thread I was using. Don't worry about that, I still think it looks fine. So I did say we have to make a loop on this end, so I'm just going to quickly run through that. So I am going to trim this end off slightly, and with a lighter I'm just going to melt the ends just so it doesn't fray when you obviously sew the loop on. So here's my lighter. Just going to really carefully, just need to trim that a bit more. Just going to really carefully melt the edge of the ribbon like that, and now I'm going to sew the loop, just this quick stitch here just to keep this loop in place. So as I said, I'm just going to fold this loop over, put it under the sewing machine and do a quick stitch. Just went over that a couple of times just to make it really secure. So there we go, that's the one end completely finished and a few pieces sewn on. Obviously all the pieces will be sewn the same, and you've just got to repeat this process across the whole piece of ribbon, and then when I finish this I'll just show you what it looks like. So here is the finished bunting. I finished both ends off the same way with the little loop here, which you can hang on to whatever you want to hang it onto. And the actual bunting like triangles I've made, They actually fold on top of each other like that because they've got a little gap between each of the triangles, so that way it's easier for like storing them, which I think is quite cool. So yeah, I'll put this up and show you what it looks like on display.